Bonjour, welcome to French class with me, Professeur Jennifer, your French teacher in the south of France. Today we're going to talk about using a new tense. Well, maybe it's new to you or maybe it's just tricky to you. It's the imperfect. Do you know what the imperfect is? If you don't, then you're in luck because I'm going to tell you all about it. The imperfect is another way to speak in the past in French. So what's the other past tense that you've probably learned by now? The passé composé. That's right. Did you find the passé composé to be a little tricky? I'm sure you did. If you didn't, then bravo. You're very, very bright and you get French right away. But usually the people think that the passé composé is complicated because you have to know which helping verb to use. Am I going to use être? Am I going to use avoir? And when do I have to make agreement and all that stuff? You can learn it, but what I'm saying is it's a little bit tricky, especially compared to the imperfect, which is what I'm going to tell you about today. The imperfect doesn't have any helping verb, so you don't have to choose between être and avoir. There's no past participle to deal with, and you don't have to make any kind of agreement. Since there's no past participle, you don't have to add e's and s's and all that kind of stuff. The imperfect is what makes life interesting in the past tense, because the passé composé, you know that the passé composé is used to talk about things that happened, things that had a definite beginning and a definite ending, right? So you can talk about a sequence of events. You can say, I got up this morning, I brushed my teeth, I drank my coffee, I got dressed, I went to work. And that's great. You've given a wonderful account of your morning. But what if you want to say something like, I woke up this morning, I really didn't want to get out of bed because I was tired, but I got up anyway, and I went into the kitchen. When I got in there, it was really dark and I was afraid, but I made the coffee anyway. So all of that description, all of the juicy stuff, all of the stuff that makes it really interesting, that's the imperfect. So that's what I'm going to teach you how to use today. The thing about the imperfect, first things first, when do you use it as opposed to the passé composé? So I just said that you use it for description, but to make it easier for English speakers, think of it in terms of, you know, when we say, we use a verb and we say, for example, I was walking, or he was reading, she was eating, we were standing. When you have that was verb ing or were verb ing, that's the imperfect in French. Maybe that'll make it easier for you. You also use the imperfect when you want to talk about something that you used to do in the past. For example, when I was little, in the summer, I used to always go to my grandmother's house, and we would always climb up to the top of the tree and spy on people. All right, those are things that we used to do in the past. It's not something that happened once. Once when I was 10 years old, I caught a cricket and I ate it. Okay, that's passé composé. But do you see the difference? How one of them is to recount a story and the actions, the sequence of events, and the other one is to give description. So the imperfect is the descriptive one. To form it, I promised you it was going to be simple, and it's true. It is simple. The one thing that makes it really nice is that there's just one exception. You know, by now, since you're studying French teachers will always tell you, and I'm no exception because it's the French language, well, yes, you always do it this way, except in these 10 or 20 or 30 situations, which you have to memorize. In the imperfect, there's just one verb that's irregular, and I'll tell you about it at the end. All of the other ones are formed the same way. So if you know your present tense conjugation of a verb, any verb, except the verb être, and that's the weird one that we'll get to later, all of the verbs in the present tense new form, what three letters do they end with? I'll bet you know. They all end in O-N-S, in the new form, right? So what you do, whether you have a regular verb or even an irregular verb, you just look at the new present tense form and you take off the O-N-S, and that's where you find what we'll call the stem. So in case that doesn't make sense to you, the stem is what you need to add imperfect endings to. And I'm going to tell you what those are here in just a few minutes. Find the stem. That's the simplest and one of the, well, it's half of the work, right? So let's take just a regular verb to begin with. Let's take the verb finir, right? That's a regular IR verb. What's the new form? Nous in the present tense. Nous finissons. Nous finissons. Take off the O and S, and everything that comes before it, that's your stem. So F-I-N-I-S-S. That's your stem for the verb finir in the imperfect. So now you need to know the imperfect endings. The thing is, for the je, tu, il, nous, vous, il, there's going to be a different ending for each one of those. And yeah, you have to memorize it, but it's always going to be the same whenever you're speaking in the imperfect. So the je ending is A-I-S. Since we're talking about that verb finir, and we want to say I was finishing or I used to finish, we'll just tack on the AIS to the stem, and we have je finissais. Je finissais mes devoirs. Je finissais mes devoirs. I was finishing my homework. The tu form ending is the same as the je form. It's AIS. Tu finissais. You were finishing or you used to finish. The il, elle, on ending for the imperfect is AIT. Il finissait. He was finishing. Elle finissait. She used to finish. On finissait. We were finishing. The new form, the ending is IONS. So you have to remember to put the I in there and listen to the way it sounds. Nous finissions. So you do hear the I when it's pronounced. Nous finissions. What does it mean? We were finishing, or we used to finish. Vous finissiez. Can you hear what the ending is? I-E-Z. That's right. Vous finissiez. You were finishing. And then the il plural and elle plural. Il finissait, elle finissait. They were finishing. Now that ending, when I say it, it sounds awesome, right? Il finissait, it's easy to say. Just remember that. The je, tu, il, singular, and the il plural, they all sound the same. Je finissais, tu finissais, il finissait, and then the plural, il finissait. But listen to what the actual ending looks like when it's written out. A-I-E-N-T. So don't be scared off by all those vowels stuck together. It's still just pronounced A. So, il finissait, they were finishing. Now, I told you that I would tell you about the verb être because that's the only verb in French that is irregular in the imperfect. Why is it irregular? Can you imagine? I think I made a little hint earlier, or maybe I even told you. It's because the new form of the verb être in the present tense doesn't have an O and S on it, right? What is it? It's nous sommes. So nous sommes, there's no O and S to take off, so you can't find the stem that way. Look, the stem is E with an accent aigu and T. Then you just add your endings. So the imperfect will be j'étais, tu étais, il était, elle était, on était. It means I was, you were, he, she, we were. And then nous étions, we were, I-O-N-S. Vous étiez, you were, I-E-Z. And ils étaient, A-I-E-N-T. Voilà. So remember that, and now I'm going to give you a few examples how to use the imperfect with following these same rules. Just for the examples, let's take an irregular verb, just for the fun of it. We did finir before. Je finissais mes devoirs. I was finishing my homework. Now let's take an otherwise irregular verb. Because you know, in the imperfect, it's not irregular. You find the stem the same way, and you add all the same endings. So how about the verb lire? What does it mean? That's right, to read. So how do you find the stem? Do you remember the rule? What's the new form of the present tense? Nous lisons. Take off the O and S, and what's your stem? L-I-S. All you have to do is add your endings, so let's go. I'm going to make an example. Je lisais le journal. What does it mean? I was reading the newspaper. Je lisais le journal. Nous lisions un bon livre. We were reading a good book. Ils lisaient un magazine. They were reading a magazine. See, it's pretty simple to put it all together. Now, what I want to do is give you an example of a sentence where you use the imperfect and the passé composé at the same time, because remember, that's what I said is going to make your life seem much more interesting. Not only were you reading a book, but while you were reading a book, the telephone rang. So I was reading, that's the imperfect. You're setting up the scene. Here's what was going on. You give someone a mental image, you sitting on the couch reading your book, and then something happens. Well, you know that's the passé composé, because remember the rule about the passé composé. If it had a beginning and it had an ending, it was something that happens, you have to use the passé composé. So here we go. Let's say we were reading a magazine when the phone rang. And just because we want to do it really the French way, we're going to use the subject pronoun on instead of nous. Because remember, on means we in spoken French. They really use on a lot more than nous. So, on lisait le magazine. We were reading the magazine quand le téléphone a sonné. Le téléphone a, there's your helping verb, avoir, sonné, and that's your past participle for the verb sonner, which means to ring. Voila, you see how you can do that? I'd love to see some examples that you come up with, either just using the imperfect in a sentence all by itself, or even better, putting together a sentence where you have the imperfect, setting up the scene, and then something happens. And that's what happens is going to be in the passé composé. I hope that was helpful to you. Definitely let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions for a future topic. And if you want a written account of this lesson and some exercises to go along with it, don't hesitate to click there on the bottom of the screen. I've made you a PDF file that you can download. It's also down in the description of the video. And one more thing. If you haven't signed up for my newsletter, it's brand new, this week is just the second week for it, but I'm putting out a newsletter with fun stuff, interesting stuff, all the way right into your inbox directly from me, your French teacher in the south of France, once a week. Take advantage of it. Let me know what you think, and come back next week for another lesson. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir tout le monde.